It's Tuesday, April 18th. We're less than 10 days away from the NFL draft kicking off in Kansas City. And to wrap up our teams that will shape the draft series today, we dive into the best team and the worst team from the NFC last year, both of which happened to be picking back-to-back in the top 10. Shout out to the New Orleans Saints for that one. It's the Chicago Bears and the Philadelphia Eagles. Andy Behrens will be joining the show later on to talk about the Chicago Bears. Of course, how could we not have Chicago's favorite son talk about the very Bears that he loves so much? But joining me to talk all things Eagles on this pod is none other than Dalton Del Don. Dalton, how are you recovering from the stomp heard around the world and your Warriors being down 0-2?
Yeah, Draymond Green, not doing well. Warriors down, and now you're going to make me talk about the team that knocked the Niners out of the playoffs too, the Eagles. So yeah, it's not ideal here, but Warriors coming back home. But yeah, this could be the end of the dynasty here. Yeah, they're on the ropes for sure. Happy for the Kings, but yeah, this is a rough one for any Dub Nation here.
Well, we'll see if you can find a way to squeeze Trey Lance into any of our discussions today with the Philadelphia Eagles. That would be a bit of a stretch, but it'd be great by you if you can manage to do that. But yeah, let's dive in here. We got actually a couple of news items to hit on before we talk about the Eagles. One of the news items, the biggest news item, will actually transition us into the Eagles, but we'll get to that. Let's start with some good news, though, here on the podcast, Dalton. Elena Getzenberg of ESPN reports that Damar Hamlin has officially announced his return to football. He said, quote, "I'm here to announce that I plan on making a comeback to the NFL." He also said that he did suffer from commotio cordis on January 2nd. I mean, hey, just great news for Damar Hamlin, and we'll see how his career and his health progresses as he attempts to make a comeback here. You know, a guy that was starting on that Bills defense, a Bills defense that's going to be in a little bit of flux this year with Leslie Frazier taking a year off from coaching and Sean McDermott kind of stepping into a potential bigger role there.
Yeah, obviously great news, and even sooner than many expected. And Hamlin's the heavy favorite to win Comeback Player of the Year award, and rightfully so. So yeah, obviously great.
What are the
news.
odds? What are the odds there?
I forgot what it was. Steamed really minus 10,000 or something very, very high. Yeah, he's the heavy favorite. Yeah, as he should be, obviously.
100%. Well, yeah, just quick shout out to him, and I think the Bills are going to be really. You know, it's funny. I was talking about them with somebody the other day, and you just forget the emotional load that was on that team to end the season. And, you know, I said in the playoffs, they felt like a team that kind of ran out of gas, and you can understand why. So I think this will be a nice little jolt for them to get this good news heading into the draft, heading into off-season programs and stuff like that. Like voluntary workouts are starting to happen right now. So shout out to Damar Hamlin. That's awesome. Next thing here, Tom Pelissero reported this morning that the Steelers were working on finalizing a trade to acquire Allen Robinson from the LA Rams. They had been granted permission to give him a physical, and if the Steelers were comfortable with the physical, Robinson was expected to land in Pittsburgh. That happened right as we were about to start recording here. The deal got done, and it's basically for a pick swap in the 7th round. The Rams are eating $10.3 million of his remaining salary. The Steelers are going to pay him just $5 million this year, so they're basically acquiring him for nothing. A super, super low risk move for the Pittsburgh Steelers, because Dalton, that Steelers depth chart, like Deontay Johnson, good player. We like Deontay Johnson. Pickens, I think, has a lot of potential as well. But they had basically nothing proven on that depth chart behind them. Like Calvin Austin was a rookie they drafted last year who missed the entire season. It was a really, really light depth chart. And I think this kind of shows like they looked at the guys who could be around early in the draft and said either, hey, we have bigger needs, or we don't like these guys as much. Let's go get a low-cost guy who might be our third receiver here.
Hamlin just minus 200 to be clear, but still the heavy favorite. No one else is even within 10-1, I guess. But Allen Robinson, we were both really wrong about last year. I know I was. I ranked him way too high. I know you don't love the yards per route run metric, but he was like bottom 3 or something. It was really ugly. So yeah, what do you want to say here? I mean, the Rams are eating most of this contract, I'll assume. Maybe Pickens won't lead the league in go routes by 50 plus next year. And I don't know, Robinson, and he was given in a situation. I mean, even after Kupp went down, I know that we all tried to look at the film after week 1, but it was immediately like apparent that, those who spent third or fourth round, he was getting steamed up to, and it was bad. It was ugly. So I don't really know how we can get excited about A-Rob at this point.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily going to be excited about Allen Robinson as an individual. Look, I said this on Twitter this morning, like you'll never get any Allen Robinson disrespect from me. The guy basically put reception perception on the map back in 2015. So I'll hear no slander about him as a player and as a person. But look, I think what this does for Pittsburgh is it gets a veteran in the room, like a guy who works hard, a guy who knows how to go about his business. Like this is like they have George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. Both guys are young. And again, they don't have any veterans in that room. Robinson is at least a professional wide receiver who's been around for a long time. And I think from that standpoint, and again, they're buying the guy for basically nothing. Like the Rams are eating the vast majority of his $15 million salary this year. So it makes sense there. And it was a position of need. I will say too, that like, I'm kind of curious though, where Robinson fits, because he has been an outside receiver for the most part. I mean, but the Bears experimented with him as a slot receiver a little bit. I had heard from teams in the league that basically most people that thought when he hit free agency that he should be like more of a full-time slot receiver to transition into the second part of his career after the Bears years and stuff like that. And I think basically what we saw last year from him, and look, I agree, like the yards per route run metrics, not great and stuff like that, but that was like a non-functional offense basically from the jump in LA. Go ahead.
I was going to say, with so many targets and Deontay Johnson not putting up the yardage, I think many assumed he ran out of the slot a lot. But I saw you respond, and you said that to someone that he's not been used in the slot at all, right, Deontay?
At all. Yeah, never. That's basically size profiling, number one, because he's a smaller guy, and because the offense is so quick hitting. It's so like Ben getting the ball out of his hands so fast to end his career. People think he's like, oh, he's running slot receiver routes, but he has been a full-time outside receiver. So maybe he transitions into that slot receiver role. But again, teams had thought that Robinson might need to move into more of like how Cooper Kupp is used. And that's why people didn't really like that signing. I should have paid more attention to this, but just the situation seemingly was so great, but it was an awful situation in Los Angeles with no offensive line. They couldn't get the ball to anybody beyond Cooper Kupp when Cooper Kupp was healthy. And things fell apart so quickly. People also overlooked it, like all of those training camp hype videos and stuff like that for Allen Robinson. It was like John Wolford throwing the ball because Matthew Stafford basically took no reps until week 1. So disastrous situation, fresh start for both sides here. Again, I'm just curious if Robinson ends up being like their full-time big slot receiver, or if Deontay moves into the slot. I'm curious about that. But yeah, for the most part here, I don't think this is like a big-time fantasy needle-moving move, because Dalton, we're all still talking about like this in a Matt Canada offense. And I hate Matt Canada's offense. I think it's the worst designed offense in the NFL. And like, actually, it's kind of funny because my biggest complaint with Robinson at the end of his Bears tenure was all they're doing is running him like short hitches. And then even with LA last year, they're like, we're going to expand Allen Robinson's route tree and hitch route. You know who loves the hitch routes? Matt Canada. So at least he'll be familiar with that part. Like, yeah, again, I don't know how excited I can get about the Steelers offense generally. And obviously this move, again, not a fantasy needle mover.
And
really.
He's committed to the bit of playing with shaky quarterback situations. I mean, Stafford last year even went down when we thought finally, and now again, who knows with Pickett's development, it could be another rough one for Robinson as far as target accuracy.
Jalen Hurts is the biggest news item here, and it's going to transition us into our Eagles discussion. Like you mentioned, he had an awesome year last year. The Eagles have rewarded him. Perfect timing here for our show. The Eagles decided to give him a huge contract. It's 5 years, up to $255 million. $179 million of that is guaranteed. He becomes the highest paid player in NFL history. The Eagles also gave him a no trade clause. It's the first ever no trade clause in Eagles history. So the contract says a lot about what Jalen Hurts has become. And I think it's worth remembering, Dalton, like the full story of Jalen Hurts, because it's going to go down as one of the craziest ones in NFL history, really. I mean, in football history, because this is a guy who at Alabama was benched in a national championship game for Tua. Tua gets hurt his final year of college. Jalen Hurts comes back in and, was kind of up and down, right? Like he ends up having to transfer to Oklahoma, and he had an awesome year at Oklahoma. Then he gets drafted by the Eagles, who had Carson Wentz on a big fat franchise quarterback contract. So it's like, why are you taking Jalen Hurts in the second round? And then he gets in there, and I made this point when they traded for AJ Brown, and people were, immediately dogging Jalen Hurts as a guy that, he's not even a quarterback. He's a running back. Too bad AJ Brown has no quarterback throwing him the ball. It's like, the thing you got to pay attention with Jalen Hurts is that from his final year at Alabama to Oklahoma, he got better. Every step of the way, he got better. And then in the NFL, like if you look at his adjusted yards per attempt, he got better each of the seasons leading up to his big breakout year last year. So I think it's just worth remembering with Jalen Hurts, like, players can improve when they work their ass off. And that's really like the thing here for Jalen Hurts, the work ethic, the commitment to the game, the leadership, that all is not just a thing that you talk about, but it's reflective in his game. And it's a reason that he's gotten this contract, which this time last year, people are like, well, you know what? The Eagles have all these draft picks. They could replace Jalen Hurts at some point. And now he's their franchise guy with a no trade clause.
Jalen Hurts was the best player in the field during the Super Bowl last year, even with obviously the one touchdown he gave away. But dude was awesome. Yes, it helps playing with the best offensive line, 2 awesome receivers. A.J. Brown. I ranked Hurts last year as my number 2 fantasy QB entering the year. I was a believer. Part of it, A.J. Brown, it's not just, you're adding another good receiver. You would agree with me that they're adding, a top 12 talent, right? You could,
yeah. I said
argue
last
if he's
year
top 10 or not, but and Devontae Smith, I'm going to argue with you later in this pod. Maybe he should be drafted ahead of him even. So 2 awesome receivers, the best offensive line, good coaching. Obviously, all that contributed as well. But Hurts, the player, really developed even faster than his biggest optimist could have expected. Because again, he was the best player in the field in the Super Bowl, man. Very impressive.
You can find the receipts from draft night when A.J. Brown got traded last year. I said A.J. Brown has top 5 wide receiver talent, like not top 10, not top 10, not top 12, like he had top 5. And I think he was a top 5 receiver last year for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I mean, man, yeah, he's that good at the game. He's been each of his 3 years with the Tennessee, or his last 2 years with the Tennessee Titans, he was top 5 in both success rate versus man and press coverage and reception perception. Like, he's a dog. So yeah, I mean, like, you get that guy with Jalen Hurts. That's how you take the step to superstardom when you pair a player like that. But Hurts' individual improvement is also a big part of this too, and the reason that we're here. Sure. Again, we'll talk Eagles fully in a second, but just before we get into it, like, what's the domino effect of this contract for future quarterback negotiations? Because we have Lamar Jackson obviously is still out there. We have Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow are kind of next in the conversation. So how does this deal sort of affect those guys?
I'm bad at contracts. I hate them. And what is money these days? Inflation's out of control, just crazy. Going out to dinner is just so different than it was 6 months ago. But yes, Herbert's going to get paid. Burrow's going to get paid. Isn't this the way it's been? It's just the next person becomes the next highest paid player in NFL history. Yeah. So I'm certainly not going to argue that he wasn't deserving of this. He plays the most important position in sports, and he's young. And I mean, he takes a lot of hits and bigger injury risks than some, maybe. Does this look like a lot of money? Of course. But I mean, he provides the value. And then, yes, the quarterback market is going to look outrageous. And it is interesting that the report that Lamar turned down a similar deal, that seemed like a pretty big deal he turned down. I don't know how true that is, but that was kind of eye-opening. But I hate talking about contracts, and I'm really bad, and I find them boring, and I frankly gloss over it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is, it's not our money. I could not give less of a shit with these guys. I mean, like, it's not my money. Pay them all the money that you want. The only thing is, I think that with this deal out there now, I think this is going to set the market for, and like, I think this officially sets the Deshaun Watson deal as an outlier. That, like, fully guaranteed deal, like, that was nonsense. It looks bad right now. Like, I think if that had aged well, maybe we could be having a different conversation. But the fact that Jalen Hurts, a guy who just led his team to the Super Bowl and he could have even won MVP over Patrick Mahomes if he didn't get hurt to end the year. And you're right to bring up the injury, because I guess he had right ankle surgery too. That was a note this offseason as well.
Yeah, that's his third year in a row then that he's injured. Yeah. Maybe that's going to be a trend with him, though. With the way he plays, there's just no way he can last 20 weeks without getting injured. But this is all 3 years he's played the final 4 to 6 weeks with a compromising leg injury, for what it's worth.
Yep. I just think, like, for Lamar Jackson, that part of it, like, the Ravens can go to him and be like, okay, this is the deal. It's a great point, Matt.
It's a great point. It is. It's a great point. It really changes that aspect. The Watson thing was hanging over everyone's head. So it's a great point.
Yeah, this is the deal. Like, we'll make it, we'll give you $52 million a year instead of $51 million a year. We'll bump you by that much. Like, but that's it. This is the deal. And that's the deal he'd probably get anywhere else. Unless he was a true free agent, I guess. But no, another guy that's injured to each of the last years. But I think this puts, like, if he's truly still demanding, like, a fully guaranteed deal, this makes it, like, complete nonsense. But then for guys like Herbert and Burrow, yeah, they'll be every quarterback negotiation now. Every, like, franchise quarterback will be a $50 million quarterback, and that just is what it is. I'm with you, Dalton, that I don't, like, love breaking down the minutia of contracts and, like, all of that. It is just, like, this is what happens. This is what happens with quarterbacks. And yeah, now the next guy, Joe Burrow, will eventually be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, or Justin Herbert, whoever signs his deal first, and then the other guy will top him. That's just how it usually goes. The Lamar thing has just been weird and like different from that angle, but it is what it is with contracts for the most part.
So fitting though to have this contract signed right before we were about to talk about the Eagles, though. You got to love the symmetry there.
You got to really love the Eagles doing that for us. So let's dive into the Eagles here and our teams that will shape the draft series. Again, I think we kind of already talked about this, but I did at least want to say like the evolution of Jalen Hurts and the key to unlocking him. Obviously AJ Brown is there. I think we talk about we're going to talk about the Bears later with Andy and whether like Justin Fields is the next Jalen Hurts thing. But I do think that the Eagles put a really good blueprint out for a couple of different ways, Dalton. But what stands out most to you and like how they unlocked the best version of Jalen Hurts, a guy that we liked and an improving player anyways?
Well, you love the aggressive play calling, but also it's got to be noted how great their offensive line is. I mean, it really, really helps to be pitching and hitter in pitchers counts. Really, he's hitting in hitters counts, I should say, and that obviously helps. I'll swing this to a little fantasy. He's my number one fantasy QB entering next year. He had a whopping, Adam Levitan tweeted, 10 rushing touchdowns inside the 2-yard line last year. And that rule everyone assumed was going to be changed, and they didn't. They're allowing that pushing still to go on. That's huge. Jalen Hurts ranked 32nd among qualifying QBs in dropbacks per game after halftime. Just 12.9 dropbacks per game in the second half of games. So whatever he loses in efficiency, they're going to make up in volume, I feel like. So as long as obviously maybe A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith get hurt, so that's an issue there for sure. But with his rushing upside and those weapons, they could afford to lose one of them and it'd still be the top fantasy QB. So I just love with the ability to see more passes in second halves of games. That defense is not going to lead the league in yards per play against for the second year in a row. This is tough to do. We're going to go over some losses, although they do have 2 first-round picks, and they are pretty loaded. But you just got to assume that they'll have to throw more passes in second halves of games, and that'll help Hurts' his fantasy value.
You have to imagine the setup is going to be almost just as good this year because the receivers are back, whatever, like Goddard is there, but also you mentioned the offensive line, like Jason Kelce ended up coming back, and they have to replace one starter that we'll talk about, but for the most part, the ecosystem is still there for Jalen Hurts and I love your point too about the fact that they might be in more of those negative game scripts, passing more and all that. So and we can like the running back situation too. Miles Sanders is gone and they might need to use Jalen Hurts more at the goal line.
And Josh Allen just came out today or hinted at he's going to run less moving forward for his career. So yeah, I think Hurts, I'd be surprised if he doesn't actually emerge as the number one fantasy QB come August. I'm surprised he's number 3. Obviously I love Mahomes, but just the rushing upside just gives Hurts, another level. Fields is actually the only one matches him, frankly, as far as fantasy terms, but perfect situation with an aggressive head coach, 2 awesome wide receivers, an awesome tight end, and a real questionable running game. And the fact he just dominates the goal line carries. Hurts doesn't even have to be good. The fact that he's become an accurate quarterback is just, gravy.
Yeah, it's like icing on the cake for sure. And I think, too, my point about the Eagles offense and like I keep coming back to is they are really an impossible to defend unit because and this is the blueprint that we're going to talk about with the Bears as well, but like they have an elite number 1 receiver in A.J. Brown. And then they have a quarter, and like you need to dedicate extra defensive attention to that guy, or at least theoretically you want to. But even if they lost Miles Sanders, I think they'll still be a good running team. And on top of that, they have a mobile quarterback, so you have to bring that safety into the box as well. So then you can't double A.J. Brown. And oh, by the way, they have a nightmare to cover on the other side of the field in Devonta Smith, and they have a tight end in Dallas Goedert who's good and also deadly in the screen game. And you typically want to run screenplays against man coverage, and you got to play man coverage against a mobile court. Like it's a real bind to defend, and all that I think is why that Jalen Hurts will be pretty unstoppable as a fantasy asset this year for sure. But let's start kind of talking about the roster a little bit here. It's funny for a team that was clearly like the best in the NFC, and maybe they were the best team in the NFL. There are some weaknesses on this roster, and I broke them down into 2 groups here, Dalton. One group that's true weaknesses and one that's like nitpicky weaknesses. The true weaknesses here, I think running back is a true weakness. They lost Miles Sanders. They bring in Rashad Penny, who people are excited about. But
how dare you?
Listen, I'm just from a health perspective. I think Rashad Penny will be good, but the guy's like never even had a 200 carry season. Is his career high like 125 carries or something like that? So, not a guy that's going to last. I think they want to.
He's seen a dozen carries in 10 career games.
Right. So Yeah, I think we can say running back is a true weakness on the roster right now. Defensive line, I think, is also a true weakness. And, they lost Javon Hargrave to your 49ers, but they also let Linval Joseph go and Ndamukong Suh, Robert Quinn. They did bring back Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, but this is a team that has always built through the offensive line and defensive line. And Howie Roseman is a guy who, it does not matter what the roster looks like. He is going to take premium positions, which are quarterback, wide receiver, offensive and defensive line, and cornerback, which safety is another true weakness I have for this team because they lost CJ Gardner-Johnson and Marcus Epps, but safety is not really a premier position. Really, like the only premium position that's a true weakness is defensive line. And so I think they get 10th overall and their second first round pick. They could potentially even double up on linemen there.
Yeah, let's talk running back here, just because I will give you a little penny. In those 10 games, he's averaging more fantasy points than Derrick Henry in his career and just been an absolute monster. I know he's always hurt, though, so fantasy managers are dealing with not only a guy who's always injured, but he doesn't catch a lot of balls, and Hurts is going to get all those close rushing touchdowns. But quick stat here, though. Over the last 2 seasons, Miles Sanders first in yards before contact, 28th in yards after contact. And over that span, Penny leads the NFL in yards after contact. So it could be a beautiful marriage with this offensive line. An eruption like Rashad Penny had arguably the best collegiate season in the past 20 years. I mean, this guy's upside is real and he's still in his prime. But yes, injured every single year, constantly, that too. And it's possible that they draft a running back in one of their 2 first round picks. So we'll see. But as of now, it's fair to call that a weakness for the position because Gainwell is, a complimentary back, and Penny is arguably the most injury prone player in the league with that, with the upside. But yes, I admit the lowest of low floors.
It is pretty crazy because and this is why also, by the way, we're going to talk about the 10th overall pick, but I think they could trade down from that pick or the 30th overall pick because they have their first round pick. They have the Saints first round pick. They have a second round pick and a third round pick, but then they don't pick again until the 7th round. And I guarantee you Howie Roseman's like, no, I'm trying to get more picks than that. So as much as people want them to take Bijan Robinson at the 10th overall pick, number one, I don't think they're going to do that because it's just not a premium position. Like I talked about, that's just not how they do things. I think they could take it back in the 2nd or 3rd round, or if they trade down and they get 4th round picks, they could take a running back there. But hypothetically, let's live in a world, Dalton, where the Eagles don't take a back in the 2nd, 3rd round. They take a back in let's just call it the 4th round because they trade down, they get a 4th round pick or something like that. Where are you drafting Rashad Penny in that situation if he's kind of sort of standing alone on the depth chart there?
He's my RB22 right now. It looks like his expert consensus rank is about RB30, and I'm on the high on the totem pole right now. But
shock.
I mean, seems like there's a lot of ups. If they don't draft a running back, yes, I'm drafting Rashad Penny as a top 24 fantasy back. Yes, that I promise. I'm sure his stock would rise to that, if not higher. But I think they will add a back at some point in the draft. And again, I understand there's a lot of downside there. But man, I mean, no Miles Sanders and Penny's so good. The efficiency would be through the roof. He would only need 15 to 18 touches. It's not like he would need 25 or something. I mean, he would just be so good behind that offensive line. But a guy can dream, Penny would be amazing if he was a featured back in Eagles offense and stayed healthy. I mean, we're talking top 5 upside overall.
Yeah, I mean, he could burn bright and fast, that's for sure, this year. He could have some incredible weeks, and then he could obviously just get injured and flame out and all that. Or he could stay healthy. You never know. I mean, look, it does happen sometimes. I think the Eagles can't plan for that to happen, which is why I do think 3rd round might be a good range for them to look at running back. So just my other nitpick weaknesses on this roster: right guard, which I think they would view as a premier position. And they lost Isaac Seumalo to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have Cam Jurgens, who was drafted as Jason Kelce's replacement. The Eagles keep doing this. They keep drafting Jason Kelce's replacement, and then they have to kick them to guard because he keeps playing. They also have linebacker, I think, is a nitpick weakness. They lost TJ Edwards, but they have Nakobe Dean, who they drafted last year to fill in. Same thing at defensive line, too. They draft Jordan Davis last year. He'll fill in for some of those bigger dudes they lost. I think tight end 2 and wide receiver 3, though, from a fantasy standpoint, those are nitpick weaknesses on the roster. Quez Watkins, probably not good enough to be the number 3 receiver. They lost Zach Pascal as well. They could also look for maybe more pop behind Dallas Goedert. And that I do think is interesting, Dalton, because again, they could look at pass catcher as a premier position. And if there's a guy at the 30th pick or something like that, just say one receiver they love falls there. I could see him taking a first-round receiver, even if they're so well set up with those two dudes. Or a tight end. It's a great tight end class. I could see them taking a tight end there that might mess the passing projections up a little bit.
Yeah, on one hand, fantasy managers hope they don't draft a skill position player. They got this concentrated target tree with Brown, Smith, and Goddard. It's perfect. And then on the other, if you're an Eagles fan, I mean, what if they draft JSN at number 10? And that what an upgrade that would be at wide receiver 3 and unstoppable that offense would become. And yeah, the best tight end draft class in recent memory. My guy Dalton Kincaid even now is the favorite to go number 1. I heard over Michael Mayer. Is that real? A lot older though. I don't know about that. Maybe they're just overrating the first name. But yeah. So fantasy managers want just go ahead and replace Hargrave there, the Gravedigger. They need some depth at the defensive line there. But if you're an Eagles fan, it'd be pretty exciting to add a JSN. I mean, is that too early at number 10 there? I mean, that would be pretty sick. No,
it would be sick, and they need a slot. Like I think. But that's the interesting thing about them, because they're such a run-heavy team. They end up playing a lot of 12 personnel, and that's why I kind of feel like they could end up, or a lot of 2 tight end sets. I think they could end up playing. They could get a second tight end, maybe. That might be the pass catcher move, because they, as much as we love the concentrated target tree between these 3 top guys, it really would be nice if they had like a legitimate speed slot receiver, like what you want Quez Watkins to be, but somebody like Marvin Mims or something in the 3rd round or 2nd round or something like that, like a speed slot type of guy that would really complete this receiver core. But yeah, I mean, obviously JSN at 10, that would be sick, but it would really, really mess a lot of projections up. That's for sure.
Yeah, it would. But yeah, developmental tight end, usually not ready right away. That'd be fine for fantasy, and a Mims, to clear deeper routes would be fine too. But as it is now, it's so perfect for fantasy. That's the thing. So I just can't wait. The next time we pod together, the draft will be behind us and we can actually know these landing spots.
Oh, dude, you and me both. 100%. I'm so ready for that. So last question here on the Eagles, Dalton. Look, they're so head and shoulders above everybody in the NFC. We talked about like the Seahawks and getting excited about the Seahawks last time we spoke. I think they're, just because of San Francisco's quarterback situation, I think you got to put them head and shoulders there because they have Jalen Hurts, that whole thing. So just a fun fill in the blank. The Eagles will not repeat as NFC champs if blank happens.
If Trey Lance stays healthy?
God.
You thought I couldn't do it. You thought I couldn't do it. Yeah. I mean, I feel like you or producer Colin is just trolling me, saying head and shoulders above the rest. Do you know that the Niners had nearly more yards per play in that conference championship game than the Eagles, and they didn't have a quarterback who could throw a forward pass in the second half? I'm serious. It was 3.8 to 3.7 yards per play in the conference championship game, and the Niners didn't have a quarterback who could throw a forward pass. Head and shoulders, but come on now. Did you not hear me say Sam Darnold was number 3 or whatever in CPAE last year? Come on, guy.
Bro. Your guy, Brock Purdy, said to our colleague Jory Epstein,
he may not even play this year.
He may not even play.
I know.
May not even play this year. And that's the guy that they're all like, oh yeah, he's our starter. So hey, this is not
Trey
me.
Lance has thrown 420 passes since 2017, since high school. It's unbelievable. All right, fine. Yeah, the Eagles are loaded. They're well coached, but football, it's a snow globe league. It changes every year. Who knows? But yeah, they look pretty well set. They're loaded. Absolutely. They're the favorites, and rightfully so. I will say that. But I don't know. I do think the Lions are going to step up. My Niners are still pretty. Like they got Hargrave now on their team, so I think they'll be competitive. But yeah, the Eagles are the clear favorites as we sit here now.
I can't believe I set you up for a Trey Lance diatribe there. You even got the 400 whatever pass attempts since high school stat in. I that's on me. That's on me. That's on me. I apologize to the listeners.
Be better. Yeah.
I got to be better than that. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Colin just started. He just started producing the show, so that's not on him. That's on me. He just got here. Okay. Like, I can't set Dalton up for a Trey Lance diatribe like that. That's on me, guys. I apologize. I take the responsibility as the quarterback of this podcast. I got to be better. I got to get better. It starts with me. I'll fill in the blank here, Dalton, and say that the Eagles won't repeat as NFC champs if they have a bad streak of health, which, by the way, can happen to anybody. Like, A.J. Brown was a huge injury risk in Tennessee. Like, knock on wood, I love A.J. Brown, but if he misses games, that would be complicated. Devontae Smith, if he gets injured, he's been a very durable guy, but look at the BMI. Look at the BMI. Maybe the BMI truthers finally went out and like he misses time. It's a light receiver core. So that I think would be like the thing here. If they can't reinvigorate the defensive line with talent and they don't have a good run of health, even if, and they did have injuries last year, Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, they had injuries last year. They had guys on defense miss time. You know, they're
Lane Johnson
not
playing.
Lane Johnson. Yeah. They're not a super fragile operation, but like, yeah, Jason Kelsey, maybe he deals with injuries. So I think injuries are the big thing here. They have these guys staying healthy, but that's kind of the thing. Actually, let's end it on this, Dalton, because I know you wanted to make the case that Devontae Smith should be ranked ahead of A.J. Brown. So you go ahead and do that.
Well, I just really wanted to ask you, I mean, we're nitpicking here. They might be ranked back to back. And if you can get Smith around later in fantasy leagues, then I think it's a no-brainer. But Smith did out-target Brown in 6 of the final 8 games. And over that span, he was the wide receiver 5 in PPR. In the playoffs, they had the same exact target share, 26.8%. You know that Devontae Smith led the league in targets per route run out of the slot, 31%, right ahead of Tyreek Hill at 30%. And then, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So, Smith also suffered an injury that he's like in a walking boot 6 weeks after the Super Bowl. He's small. So I think they're both, kind of injured. And J.J. Brown's only 1 year older, too. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. So I obviously could see the debate to both here. But am I just going after the shiny new toy, the guy who's young, me, the reverse ageism. So am I just going after the young guy? And so the market probably has it right now. A.J. Brown, the 17th pick. Then it goes 2 receivers. And then Devontae Smith, the 31st pick, right? ADP right now. One mid-second, the other early third. So fair. Either way, they're both monsters. And yeah.
And let's just, as much as it would be fun to see them get like a big time wide receiver 3 in the draft, let's keep that target tree concentrated. Let's keep that target tree concentrated, especially that way we can.
What if one gets hurt? Then the other, we're talking like, could be top 3 fantasy player.
Like 15 targets per game or something like that. And I love your slot stuff with Devontae Smith there too, because like if they take a true slot receiver, that might get messed up. So let's keep this target tree concentrated from a fantasy standpoint. We love to see it. We also love when Dalton joins us on the podcast and can find a way to get Trey Lance involved in the Eagles episode. Dalton, shout out for you being you, man. I appreciate you doing this with me. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for talking football with me, Harmon, and congrats on the house purchase. I didn't get to say that earlier, but I saw that you just became a homeowner, and congratulations. Big news.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, there's about 1,000 things running through my brain at any given moment. So if I'm scatterbrained at all, more scatterbrained than usual on the podcast, that is why, because I'm trying to, run reception perception, host this podcast, do all my Yahoo work, prepare for the frickin' draft coming up here. And also, by the way, planning a cross-country move. And now, because of a great opportunity, thank you, Dalton, I appreciate it, working on finalizing and closing on this home here very soon as well that we're going to be moving into. So, great times. No complaints from me. I live a dream, and I appreciate it. But, a lot of stuff going on in my brain, Dalton. So, it's a lot. That's for sure. But appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Congrats. Yeah, congrats.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to dive into the Bears with Andy Behrens. Joining us now, we're talking Bears. Who else could we possibly have than Yahoo's own Andy Behrens? Although I will say, Andy, I don't even know last time you've been on this podcast. I don't even know last time you put in any work at this company. I think you've been, vacationing at perhaps staying at many of your palatial estates, as the listeners know, about those situations for you. So, hey, welcome back to the show. Good to talk to you, buddy. And how excited are you to talk about the Bears?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to bringing my usual sunshiny Bears optimism to this show. Yeah, it's been finally my 2-month suspension is over. I love that you don't consider baseball content to even be work. You don't even you completely disregard it.
More so torture than work, honestly.
Tell me about it.
Wait, just real quick before we jump in the Bears, we talked about the Allen Robinson trade at the top of the show. I just have to ask you real quick, how does it make you feel that, Allen Robinson was just so desperate to get back to Mitch Trubisky that he's like, I had some of my best years with Mitch. I gotta be back with Mitch, bro. I had to get Mitch into the Bears section somewhere. And I feel like this was a good opportunity to do it. The universe presented it to us.
That was a little bit cruel. That was a little knife twisting there. Yeah. Any target that Allen Robinson receives that is taken away from George Pickens is just, I'm just going to be incensed. I'm outraged by this.
Oh, get ready to get incensed, pal. It's going to be a fun year. Okay, let's talk Bears, Andy. And, we set them up deeper into our teams that will shape the draft series, because I figured, all right, they're probably going to trade the number 1 overall pick at some point. Well, they did it 1,000 years ago. That was 50 news cycles ago. I'm sure you were definitely at one of your different palatial estates at the point where they actually traded the pick. Also, just real quick, I don't know if I've gotten this off my chest on the podcast, but it was absolutely shameful and embarrassing that they basically Friday news dumped that trade on us at 2:30 Pacific, basically. Absolutely disgraceful of your Chicago Bears to do that, Andy. But they are now at the 9th overall pick. But let's go back to the trade at that point. So let's talk long-term ramifications of this blockbuster trade with the Carolina Panthers, who we know are picking number 1 overall at this point. And if you've listened to this series so far out there, I've been doing the let's live in 2 worlds thing. Usually it's about a quarterback or not going the quarterback type of situation, but we're going to do that here with the Bears. So I want to live in 2 different worlds. First world, Andy, and this is where we're going to need your optimism. How do the Bears come out of this trade looking really, really good?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of paths to this, right? And I think in the immediate aftermath of the trade, just the simple math of it, it looked really good.
Mm-hmm.
This is a lot of assets that they received. And it also stretches out multiple years. So this isn't the sort of thing where you can, we always want to have a really quick who won, who lost. They got an additional first round pick in a loaded 2024 draft, and they got an additional second rounder in 2025. So this thing plays out over time. So a lot of different ways they can win it. I don't know, what if they walk away with Jalen Carter and Marvin Harrison Jr. next year, right? That seems like a win to me. What if DJ Moore unlocks something in the passing game, which I think is that better happen, first of all, because I can't say this enough. The Bears offense attempted 22.2 passes per game last year. That is an unserious modern offense, right? It can't be like that again. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that DJ Moore, who, he might not be a top 5, top 10 NFL receiver, but he is surely a legit wide receiver 1, a much greater talent than anything they had on the roster last year. And I think it's reasonable to expect DJ Moore to sort of unlock new levels to a passing offense, and for DJ Moore to get back to being the 1,100 yard, 4 touchdown receiver that he's always been, or whatever, right? He can have that season. The Bears can be a real offense that throws the ball 30 plus times per game, and that alone would be a win. But again, I think this unfolds over time. I think it is almost certain to be for the Bears to come out of this looking really good. There's just a whole bunch of paths that they can go in the first round. I mean, this is the thing. When you have a lot of urgent team needs, there's a lot of ways to get better quickly.
I think DJ Moore being a part of this trade increases the odds exponentially that this ages really well. Honestly, I think it increases the odds that it exponentially increases the odds that it looks really good really early. The fact that DJ Moore is not some hypothetical 2025 first round pick. He's a real player that's going to take the field in week 1 and do things for the Chicago Bears. And I agree with you that he's not a top 5, top 10 receiver, but he's probably somewhere between 18 and 25 if you sat down and ranked receivers for real life, not for fantasy, for who they are, real life guys. And I definitely think he is a true number 1 receiver. And I've talked about this so many times that he can fill multiple needs for the Bears, who need a lot of help in the wide receiver room, and that he can be a true vertical X receiver that can beat press man coverage and get open against, get open on 9 routes, get open on vertical routes. And that's what Justin Fields really needs, because he's a big game hunter, and they haven't had that true X receiver in the 2 years that he's been there, because things got so weird with the aforementioned Allen Robinson in 2021. And then obviously they didn't have that player in 2022. So DJ Moore being that guy is great, but I also think there are things about DJ Moore's game that could be unlocked in an offense that Luke Getsy sets up as more of a traditional West Coast Shanahan style offense, that they can move him around the formation, they can get him in the slot, they can get him after the catch stuff. And again, the fact that he is a real player that's going to take the field in week 1 and do those things, I think makes this trade look really, really good immediately for the Chicago Bears.
Two really interesting and important things that I think you mentioned there. One, the tendency of Justin Fields to just be like a trophy hunting quarterback, right? Like, and Luke Getsy perhaps, hopefully, maybe moving this offense in a different direction. Like, they don't have to make it look hard. Like, I think that would be great. And DJ Moore is the kind of receiver that maybe allows that, right? Like, the Bears don't have to finish at the absolute top of the league in terms of ADOT, right? Like, let's get some layups in this offense.
Yep.
Let's not have everything be like a low probability completion, right? Like, and Fields is great at it, and it's what he looks to do, right? Like, it's why he takes freaking 4 seconds to throw all the time, right? Like, it's an issue.
Yeah.
And when it works, it's freaking awesome. It's a field flipping play. It's a long score, and that's great. But that's, let's sustain some drives. Like, how about we just have a team where the ADOT is like 7.5 or 8, and we get a whole bunch of first downs and a lot more pass attempts, and it's just like, let's gain 6 yards this play. Let's gain 7 yards this play. I'm ready for that. I'm ready for it to be not a, all or nothing sort of passing game.
Yeah, we'll talk about the receivers and pass catchers here more in just a second, but I think too, having a guy like DJ Moore, it does do the traditional thing. Well, not what people think it does, but it does in a way let everybody else go into more of a comfortable role. And I'm not saying like, all right, now Darnell Mooney's going to face the number 2 corner, Chase Claypool number 3. But what I actually mean by that is that Darnell Mooney's one of these speed receivers who I think is actually better when he stretches the field horizontally as opposed to vertically. He's more of a real big boy wide receiver than somebody like Mecole Hardman, who has kind of been in that gadget type role and has been better in that way. But Hardman's the same type of way. You think of like, oh, he's got this speed, let's get him stretching the field. Like, just he's not, because he's a smaller guy, and Hardman has more problems than Mooney does, again, as a true wide receiver. But it's a similar sort of way that Hardman has been at his best when he can stretch the field horizontally. And I think Mooney was similar in his first year where he kind of came on the scene there for the Bears. I think it was he's a 2020 rookie, right? Yeah, 2020 class. He was best, I think, at that role in Matt Nagy's offense. I think he'd be good doing that here, and that he can be that now that they have a true vertical receiver who can win contested passes like DJ Moore. And obviously Chase Claypool, I think, is still struggling to become like a real wide receiver, quote unquote. And he is best when you can get him as a big slot, when you can get him away from press coverage, when you're not asking him to win contested passes. I mean, there's never been a 6'4" receiver who's worse as a contested catch receiver than Chase Claypool, just period. So again, it allows everybody else to go into a role that I think fits them best, the DJ Moore thing. So yeah, I think we're in agreement that not only is the trade going to look probably good long-term, but it's probably going to look really good in the short term because the DJ Moore thing. But let's flip this to the other side here. How do the Bears come out of here looking really bad after this trade? And I'll actually present the negative case here so that you don't have to. I think the only way that the Bears come out looking really bad in this trade, and again, I think it's like 10% that this becomes the big storyline, but I guess that if Bryce Young turns into like a star at number 1 overall, or any of the quarterbacks, I guess, that become, I think really though, it's about who the Panthers take at 1. And right now it sounds like that's going to be Bryce Young. Bryce Young becomes a star at number 1 overall and Justin Fields doesn't develop. I think there will be some, even if it's the right move to trade down and get these other assets, I think there will be some hindsight analysis. It's like, well, the Bears should have just stuck at 1 and taken Bryce Young. Duh.
100%, that is the answer. There is given the number of assets that they acquired in the trade, like, we're always going to be able to look at this and say, yeah, that was probably the right process, unless it's a total failure of player evaluation. And at the end of September, Bryce Young has 3 wins. And he's a frickin' star, and he's already almost instantaneously better than what we've seen from Justin Fields. And like, you can talk yourself into this idea that Bryce Young is just going to be a dude, and he is already in the conversation for like, oh yeah, this guy can lead a deep playoff run, and Carolina looks like they're going to take that division. And can you believe the Bears passed on this guy? That is how this goes bad. I don't really see another path. I mean, obviously they can miss on every pick, and DJ Moore can face plant, but that's so low probability that we don't even need to talk about it. The way that this goes bad in a manner that is completely out of the Bears' control is if Bryce Young is just an absolute supernova level player.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, it's sort of similar to when, I mean, there's been a handful of teams that have done this, but I guess it's sort of similar to like when the Rams traded down and Washington traded up to get Robert Griffin III. And like, didn't Jeff Fisher send out all of the guys who were part of the RG3 trade to like the midfield, like as captains to the midfield? Some sort of strange thing there, but like that ended up looking bad for Washington because Robert Griffin flamed out. But then it was like, well, the Rams didn't actually do anything with those picks anyways. Like none of those guys became like star level players or franchise cornerstones. But really, even that was like the quarterback spot for the Rams not being solved in the long term at that point ended up being problematic. But yeah, I think that's really the only way that this looks bad for the Bears is if Justin Fields doesn't take that next step to at least close the gap. So let's dive into that. And Justin Fields here, I think the trade signaled that the Bears are going to build around Justin Fields for the long haul, or at least they're using it as there are no more excuses for you, Justin Fields, right now this year. But do you agree with that? Because I would argue that this offense does kind of still need a lot of work for Fields to reach that potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly agree with that. As for whether this signals that they are just absolutely all in on Justin Fields, I think more than anything, it tells you that the talent evaluation of the Bears front office was that there is not a Patrick Mahomes in the 2023 draft class, right? And they don't think that Bryce Young is going to be that guy. I think it also signals that and rightly, that they were incredibly encouraged by the development that Fields made from year 1 to year 2, that they see that he has rare traits, which he obviously does, and that they have invested time in him and they want to continue to invest time in him, and they want like year to year coaching continuity and, continuity in the offense. And they think that they can really build off that. I think that is entirely reasonable. The offense itself is certainly not finished. The receiving core is probably still being built because like DJ Moore is great and he's a great addition. And I'm really excited about it. I thought he was probably the best receiver who could reasonably become available via trade in this offseason. So I'm a big fan. But let's remember, the Bears receiving core is starting from the darkest place, right? Right? Like that was not, again, it was an unserious receiving core last year. It was Equanimeous St. Brown, Dante Pettis, Darnell Mooney, your top wide receiver finishing the year with like 40 catches and I think fewer than 500 receiving yards, right? Like that is not a serious receiving core. And they're getting there. It can still be made better, but it's no longer the glaring, urgent, desperate need that it was, sort of this time last year. The play calling, right? Like you can't be a passing offense that only attempts 20 to 25 passes a game. That's got to change. Fields himself, right? Like there's plenty of room for development here. Like he barely dropped back last year and he was still the most sacked quarterback in the league. He took 55 sacks while attempting 22 passes a game. Like that's unbelievable. And some of that was offensive.
Andy, I saw Mike Lombardi tweet this out this morning and I had to fact check it because I was like, maybe he fudged this, but Fields has been sacked 91 times in 2 years. And he hasn't even been like a full season start because he's missed time last year with injuries. And then he wasn't the week 1 starter in 2020. He started 25 games and he's been sacked 91 times. That's absurd. And I know you're about to make the point that it's a little bit of both here, but I just had to pause to say like that's bananas.
Well, it's a lot of Fields, right? Like no, you can't reach that total without it being largely about you. And Fields just has that thing where you said it like big game hunting on almost every drop back, right? And so you just don't often have that much time in the NFL. You don't always get 4 seconds to throw. Like those are the breaks. You're not at Ohio State anymore. So that's obviously a bit of a problem. He extends plays to a fault. The offensive line clearly not perfect last year. Not a league average group last year. There, off the top of my head, I get like ballparking. I would say that there may have been 10 sacks where like the snap and a free rusher arrived simultaneously at Justin Fields. And I don't know that he could have done anything. Like, there were probably 10 or a dozen sacks that that would have happened to anybody. But of course, Fields needs to get better at diagnosing things pre-snap. I mean, he was only a second-year player. Like, I think that can all still happen. I think there can be gains there. But again, you can't take 50 plus sacks if you're throwing the ball 700 times, and you sure can't take 50 plus sacks if you're throwing the ball fewer than 400 times as they did last year. Like, it just can't happen. He's got to get better there. Another thing I would like to see from the offense, and this is where I start thinking about like what creative coordinators do with other elite rushing quarterbacks, right? Like some of the stuff that we see in Buffalo and Philly and Baltimore, like you've got to utilize like the numbers advantages that you get. And I was just thinking about Philly last year. They'd get down at the goal line and they would run that old, like Tim Tebow staple, like the fake draw jump pass. And like, what are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. He's either going to score or he's going to dump the ball to an absolutely wide open receiver. It's an unfair problem that the great rushing quarterbacks create. And the Ravens have been great at it, right? Like they'll have Lamar kind of press the line of scrimmage and it sucks everybody up. And then you've got whoever, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, whoever, just like running free. Bears got to do more of that. Like there should be more layup opportunities in this offense based on the way that Justin Fields can stress a defense. So I think that's something that I would like to see more of as well.
Yeah, I think that's one really interesting part with Justin Fields, that for basically a year and a quarter of his career, he's been in an offense that didn't seem to know how to take advantage of a rushing quarterback. Luke Getsy, I always come back to, and I talked to Justin about this at the Super Bowl, like a lot of it comes back to that Thursday night Washington game, and then everything after that felt like it changed, sort of in that mini bye, and Justin agreed, like that's kind of where they went back to the drawing board, and I think then they started to take advantage of his mobility as a lot of designed rushing. I know you and I talked about this on FFL like late last year. It's like his over for his rushing prop was just a smash every time, but you also kind of looked at it as they're going to need to not destroy the dude, And I mean, even he even said to Austin and I at the Super Bowl when we're interviewing him, Austin's like, I've never rushed for 1,000 yards and you've done that now as a quarterback. And he said to both of us, like, I don't ever want to do it again, basically, like because of all the design stuff. But you're right that from a passing game standpoint, there's so much more that they can do, I think, to take advantage of his mobility, and having a number one receiver, I think, is so important to that, just like the Eagles example that you brought up, because that's what really puts defenses in a bind. We talk all the time about double covering the top receiver and stuff like that. And that's true. Defenses last year in Carolina, they knew there was one guy to take out. They knew there was one guy in that receiver core, and they double covered DJ Moore a ton. The Bears want that same effect there because it also gets a safety out of the run game. We know they want to run the ball with their running backs, but also then it's like, if you don't have that extra safety down in the box, you don't have the 8 men in the box to defend against the run. You also put the bind there if you have a rushing quarterback and you're taking advantage of him from a passing and rushing perspective. So I agree with you. There's so much that the offense as a whole can actually do beyond the personnel.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. I assume it's going to happen. Again, I think there's so many different ways that DJ Moore can really unlock things for this offense. I need the coaching staff to be able to do it. I don't know exactly what the offensive line is going to look like this year. I think it's better already, right? Like they pick up Nate Davis. That's a meaningful addition. Like I think Whitehair can play. I think like they had a 5th rounder last year, and Braxton Jones, who I think can play. They're probably one guy away from really making that a position group where it's no longer an excuse, right? And we no longer really have to fret about it. It's at least league average, maybe it's better. So that's really close. Like they're pretty close to getting some things solved offensively, at least in terms of position groups. The line can get there. The quarterback position feels like it's, obviously they have an ascending talent. I don't think they need to mess around with the running back room, right? Like, I think it's fine for a franchise that's sort of in the state that the Bears are in. So, like, I think you can see the rough contours of a pretty good offense here.
I agree, and I'm glad you brought up the offensive line because it does feel unsettled. Like if you go to our lads right now, it's Braxton Jones at left tackle, Cody Whitehair at left guard, Lucas Patrick at center, Nate Davis at right guard, and Tevin Jenkins at right tackle. But Tevin Jenkins' future is probably at guard. I think he even might have indicated that on Twitter that he thinks he's moving to guard full time. Cody Whitehair's a guy who has played and can play center. Braxton Jones, I agree. Like he showed he could probably be, like a starting left tackle, and that was as a rookie, a day 3 rookie. Maybe he takes a step, and I think that's going to sort of inform how they view these guys and where they fit is going to inform what they do. I think in 9th overall, we'll talk about the pick, but like I think you could look at that as, hey, Peter Skoronski's a guy who could play tackle, or you could kick him into guard. He's a local guy. Paris Johnson and like Darnell Wright are more pure tackles. So that's going to be a real big indicator if the Bears go offensive line and they do that at 9th overall, who they take and how that player projects, whether it's a movable guy like Skoronski, position versatile guy, or one of those like pure tackles. That would tell us a lot about what they think about this line.
I think, maybe we'll talk about this in a little bit. I think it's really possible that they have and listen, I'm not like I'm not the guy who should be grading offensive line talent for you pre-draft, but I think it's entirely possible that the Bears may have similar grades on these guys. You certainly see them in different orders on different boards, right? And if they do, they may not stick at 9, right? Like this might be a situation where there's like 4 offensive tackles sitting there and they like them all, and they would sort of slot them in the same tier of prospect, and then you can trade back again and you can pick up more assets, because that's, we haven't even talked about it, but like things are dire for this defense. Like there are more glaring needs with this defense than there are for this offense. They were like the Bears were last in the league the Bears sacked quarterbacks 20 times last year in 17 games. They gave up the most yards per pass attempt to opposing quarterbacks. Like they were terrible in a lot of really important ways that haven't been fully addressed, right? So like, it's not like they just have a couple of position groups that they need to shore up and then all of a sudden we're ready to compete for a division. It's they're much farther away than that. So there's a lot that needs to be addressed. So I can easily, and they don't have depth anywhere defensively. No. So I can easily imagine a scenario where they end up, like if they're zeroed in on like Carter this year and he's not there, I can definitely imagine a scenario where they trade back again, acquire another pick or 2, and they still get an offensive lineman that they think is roughly equivalent to what they would have taken at 9.
That's a great point, because I think as we talk about the offense, it's a lot of, I won't call them nitpicky needs, because even as we're talking about wide receiver, Chase Claypool and Darnell Mooney are up for free agency after this year. Both of them were 2020 picks and they weren't first rounders, so they don't have a 5th-year option. Like they're going to, and there's about a 0% chance I think they commit to both long term. They might not commit to either long term if they don't want to give them like $16 million, which is kind of like the going rate for a number 2 receiver at this point. Like, they won't do it for both. I think it's kind of, maybe they see how this year plays out for either of those 2 guys. And then, they brought back like Equanimous St. Brown's on the roster. They brought back Dante Pettis, but like those are mostly special teamers, and your boy Velus Jones, we don't really know what he's going to be yet either. So I can certainly see them taking a receiver, but if they took a receiver, that guy's probably not cracking the 3 receiver rotation early on. So that feels a little nitpicky. Tight end, they have Robert Tonyan, whatever, but like Cole Kmet had a pretty nice year last year. I think they can count on him. And I agree with you that the running back room is probably settled with Donta Foreman, Khalil Herbert, and Travis Homer, who they brought in, is kind of more of a special teamer passing down back. So that is that. And we can transition this to the draft, because I agree that like as much as those are nitpicky needs, but there's still things that they might want to prioritize along with the offensive line on offense. But yeah, dude, I'm looking at his defensive depth chart, and it's like I know they added Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards at linebacker, but the edge rushing position's not great. The general defensive tackle position's not great. The depth it's not Arizona Cardinals level bad. I mean, if you want to scare yourself, go look at the Cardinals like defensive depth chart right now. That's a frightening picture. Jonathan Gannon's going to have his work cut out for him over there. In terms of the Bears defense, though, it's a lack of depth. So I guess as we transition here to the draft and 9th overall, what's like your dream pick at number 9 if they stick and pick there?
I feel like Carter is probably he's probably the the closest thing to a real game wrecker, like a real potential disruptive force, which is just what they don't have, right? It is not on the roster. And I have a bunch of friends who are like meathead Bears fans, and everybody was excited about some of the signings, but I'm not sure that they're anything more than like sort of marginally better defensively based on free agent signings in this period. They need a game wrecker defensively. They need somebody, whether we'll take one of the, I don't know, are there Bosa's left? Are there any free Bosa's out there? Like, we need one of those guys, right? Like, look at the teams that made the damn, conference championship games, right? Like Kansas City had one, the Eagles had multiple guys, Cincinnati had one, like the Niners sure as had one, right? Like everybody's got a game wrecker on the defensive line. The Bears don't have that. So whether it's Carter or anybody else who slips, like that's probably the most glaring need for this team. It's also like, it's just like a franchise identity thing too. So I think Bears fans would be pretty excited about that. So listen, Carter has had a wild offseason in terms of like his trajectory. Obviously, there's the off the field stuff. He had according to all accounts, pretty terrible pro day, right? So it's not like there aren't worries there, but just based on the early evaluations, I mean, a couple months ago, people would have thought that the Bears would have been interested in him with the first overall pick before they made the trade. So if you can get that guy at 9, that seems like pretty close to a best case scenario.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, the whole, you saw the clip of the Kelsey brothers doing the, like, can you name this head coach thing, right? And like, I mean, you knew going into it, he wasn't going to get Matt Eberflus because, like, I mean, could you pick Matt Eberflus out of a lineup? Like, how many Bears fans could identify Matt Eberflus out of a lineup? Like,
if you showed me like 30 golf pros and Matt Eberflus was like tucked in there, I don't think I would be able to flag him. No.
And I feel like we kind of, maybe it's because he's a defensive coach and like, we are so offensive focused as obviously, like, not just even from a fantasy sense, but the league as a whole is like really, they're dialed in on, everybody's dialed in on offense. Everybody wants like a young offensive coordinator. Everybody wants Sean McVay, whatever. We know that. Maybe it's because of that, but I feel like we just know even so little about what he wants on defense. I mean, we know he's like a pretty strict cover 2 guy, and I think that's why they signed like Tremaine Edmonds to a big money deal, because he's probably more of like he's great as that cover 2 inside linebacker, because he's so tall and he can run down the field and cover deep zones, stuff like that. Yeah. I think we're sort of kind of getting it, but I feel like because Eberflus is such an unknown, that I'm even sitting here thinking, like, when he visions game record, does he envision a Jalen Carter? Will Anderson and like Tyree Wilson probably aren't going to be there, but does he envision that guy in his dream scenario? I feel like we still know so little about the dude.
Yeah, as you described that, it's not like the secondary is set either. I mean, like, if you were to create a sort of hierarchy of needs for this team, it probably starts with defensive tackle and edge rusher, and then you're talking about cornerbacks too. Like, these are some of the most difficult positions to fill in the league, and they need it all. And they need it all like in this offseason, if at all possible, right? Like, these are the most expensive positions. These are the toughest fills, and like, they don't have answers at any of them. Like, Edmonds might be the one guy that I feel really good about on this defense. And he's not a change the trajectory of the franchise sort of player necessarily, but I'm happy about it. But they just have so many needs defensively, and it's why realistically, like, I don't see how the Bears come out of this. Like, this can be a great offseason, and you're still, maybe you're a 7-win team, maybe you're an 8-win team. Like, this franchise has a long way to go. They're not. Again, maybe I'm skipping ahead in the conversation here, but like, I've seen so many people, like, whether it's on Twitter or elsewhere, try to shoehorn the Bears into this conversation where, like, oh man, they're just like the Eagles this team is not where the Eagles were in 2021, right? Like, they don't have any position group like fully solved. And they're not like 1 or 2 players away. They're not quite on that development path. So I think, the idea of adding that second first round pick in 2024, that was so meaningful to them. I think they're probably 2 draft cycles away from really competing for anything serious.
Yeah, that was going to be kind of my next question to you here, because like you look at BetMGM, and this is from April 12th, so a little while ago, but at that point they had the fifth best odds to win the NFC, and we know the conference is watered, and they were tied with like the Vikings and the Saints and the Giants, but you know they've got better odds than the Packers, they've got better odds than the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks thing is egregious. We talked about the Seahawks last week with Dalton. Like the Seahawks should be up there with like the Lions and Cowboys. I think they should be in that tier. But yeah, and like the Bears have gotten a decent bit of like tickets on this bet because of the I don't know, but that seems crazy to me. Yeah, like we're sitting here talking about, and you know they have a decent bit of draft picks. Like they have the 9th overall pick, they have 2 second rounders. We know they don't have their natural second rounder because of the Chase Claypool thing, but they still have 2 second rounders. They have a 3rd, they have 2 4ths, they have 2 5ths, they have 2 7ths, no 6 rounders. They're not desperate for picks, but they're also not loaded with picks either. So I'm with you that I still think because of the need, like again, the nitpicky sort of needs that we can, and I don't even think they're nitpicky. I think they are serious needs on offense from a skill position standpoint. Like the wide receiver, I think still needs to be addressed. The offensive line is still an issue, and the defense is just not blank canvas completely, but pretty close.
Pretty close, yeah.
I don't think they're really like a Bengals when Joe Burrow got there in his second year. One draft class sort of elevated them immediately, or like Jacksonville last year where they get those dudes in free agency and a little bit in the draft too, and they immediately go to work. Like I know the NFC is watered down here, but there's a lot of, we have used the word if an awful lot on this podcast, or at least alluded to it, not just from a roster building standpoint, but also from a coaching staff standpoint. And you know, we talked about the Eagles earlier in the show, you know, and it's like, I think the comparison, as you just said, like can Justin Fields become the next Jalen Hurts? That's a tall task as well, even at this point.
It's a little disrespectful and dismissive of what Jalen Hurts just did, right? Like that was a phenomenal season. We shouldn't talk about it as, I know it feels like, you know, oh man, there's one of these stories every year because it happened to Josh Allen and it happened to Jalen Hurts, but those are just like heroic off seasons that those guys had. And yes, it helped that they add Stephon Diggs to Buffalo and that they add AJ Brown to Philly. But Hurts 2 years ago sailed so many throws, and there was there were real conversations that were not, I mean, they were fair about what his ceiling would become as a passer. And to make the leap from, you know, you're completing 60% of your throws to like you're completing almost 70% of your throws and you're a legit MVP candidate, that's not just something that happens all of the time. And we shouldn't put that on Fields, and we shouldn't be so dismissive of it with Jalen Hurts. That said, like you look at where Hurts's like actual performance metric, like his actual stats in 2021 versus where Fields was last year in terms of yards per attempt, in terms of, you know, just touchdowns and interceptions and completion percentage, like they're real close. They're really, really close. And, you know, at least Jalen Hurts had like Devontae Smith to work with. Justin Fields was literally throwing to Dante Pettis, Equinemius St. Brown, and Darnell Mooney. Just a totally unserious receiving core. So I think it is completely realistic. It would be a huge disappointment if Justin Fields merely has a season that looks a lot like last year. It should get better. The supporting cast on offense is already better, and I think it's about to get. I think it's about to take yet another step. So that's good, right? Like again, they can't just throw the ball 20 times a game anymore. That is comical, and it shouldn't happen. Like I think we're going to see strides. I don't want to just automatically say, oh yeah, he's going to be the next in this endless line of quarterbacks who make the leap from shows some promise to MVP candidate who leads his team to the conference championship game, right? Like I don't want to put that on Justin Fields, also because I don't think that outcome for the Bears as a team is realistic in 2023. I think we, you know, like everything goes right and they knock some stuff out of the park. I think they can get there in 2024, and then maybe we're talking about Justin Fields as a 5-year, $250 million guy. I think that's the best case scenario. That's awesome. I don't think it happens in 2023.
Yeah, I made this point earlier in the podcast when we talked about Jalen Hurts, and I made this point when AJ Brown got traded there, and everybody's reaction, well, he doesn't have a quarterback, doesn't have a quarterback. The thing with Jalen Hurts that's always been so impressive is that he has made incremental improvement every single year from his final year to Alabama to 2021, his second year in the NFL. And it's really, it's shown in his adjusted yards per attempt, which just from the NFL, 6.8 his first year, 7.1 in his second year, and 8.4 obviously in his big breakout season. The problem for Justin Fields is that he's starting even lower than that. Like he's at 5.8 his first year, 6.6 his second year. So I think he could take a leap, but still not be as good as Jalen Hurts. And I think that, to your point, it's discounting what Jalen Hurts has done as a player. But
yes, yeah.
If we're talking about the candidate, like the make the leap quarterback candidates, Justin Fields is right at the top of the list. I think you and I agree on that. It's just there are some things that need to happen from a roster standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, and from a Justin Fields standpoint to make that happen. But that could certainly happen, Andy, and I think that's why maybe it's not fifth best odds to win the NFC. Optimism warranted, but but optimism for your Bears, I think, based on this conversation, is certainly warranted because the possibilities are there. Hell of a performance from you in your first game off suspension. Appreciate you doing this, man. I mean, not that I got to twist your arm to ever come on here and talk about the Chicago Bears, but tell the people what you've got going on from a baseball standpoint, football standpoint, whatever you're doing now that you're off your suspension.
Yeah, just a disgusting amount of baseball content right now. We've got pickups all the time. The listeners to this podcast don't give a about our baseball offerings.
They might.
But they're out there. Really, I'm just looking forward to getting back in the football conversation and getting on a few more of these preview podcasts.
Hell yeah, man. All right, Andy, appreciate you. Thanks for doing this, man. And like I said, it's an interesting time for the Bears, so glad you did it. All right, that's going to do it for this episode and our teams that will shape the draft series. I hope you all enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. We talked to a lot of great folks. Thank you today to my colleagues Dalton Del Don and Andy Behrens for jumping on the pod and crushing it. A great ending to this series. Make sure you're following them both on Twitter at Dalton Del Don, at Andy Behrens. I'm, of course, at Matt Harmon _BYB. And while you're there, it's always a good time to follow at Yahoo Fantasy. On Thursday, we round out our pre-draft series, the prospect deep dives, with a loaded tight end class. And I'm hoping to get these guys to help restore the middle class of the fantasy tight end position. We're also going to talk some offensive line with Charles McDonald when he joins me for that. Until then, we're out.